Welcome to Holly's Pandorium, featuring your host, psychic medium Holly Jordan.
Hey everybody, it's Holly and Doug is with me tonight. And we are going to talk about some fun stuff, but I wanted to just say, you know how some things start one way and wind up a totally different way that you weren't expecting? So, you know the Sir Arthur Conan Doyle, Sherlock Holmes stories, and there's a really particular well-known story about the Hounds of the Baskerville. And I don't know it that well, but Doug has shared with me that it's basically a murder mystery. And doing a little bit of research, we learned that there was an origin story to the Hound of the Baskervilles. And so what's really amazing about this is it's a story about a legend that started back several hundred years ago. And so forgive me, but I'm going to look away from the screen a couple of times just to read my notes because there was a lot that we found that was really interesting. So the dog that this Hound of Baskerville was based on actually had a name. It was in England and it was called by a few different things. It was Old Shuck, Black Shuck, just the word Shuck, and Hellhound. And they said that it was, in some accounts, it's been seen by many people over many generations. Some people said it was the size of a horse. They always said it had black hair and red eyes. That was consistent. But what's interesting is there's always this legend that you never look at it. You never make eye contact with it because it will come after you if you do. So there was always this understanding in the providences that was repeated generation to generation. If you see this black dog, don't look at it. It'll follow you. Just stay out of its way and it won't bother you, basically. And it was always in the countryside. And the only other variation of that, of the example of what it looks like, is that it either had one eye in the center like a cyclops or two, but they were always red, which I thought was kind of amazing.
Red and glowing.
Right. So what's interesting, though, is that's a big dog. I mean, that's bigger than most dogs that we have in this day and age. Like the biggest dogs I've been around is the Irish Wolfhound, or like a Newfoundland, or what is that one? The big white, Grand Pyrenees. Those are really big dogs also.
My assumption is back then, the bull breeds, like the English bulldogs and things like that, were a lot bigger. They were a lot bigger than what we have today. They were bred because of the violence that the dogs were trained to do. Mm-hmm. A lot of the English Cockneys who raised them they started breeding them smaller and trying to reduce the aggression temperament. And so now we have them like we do now. Mm-hmm. But back then they were very, very large. I mean, bigger than pit bulls, bigger than bull mastiffs. Well, they were putting them in rings, and fighting bulls and bears. Mm-hmm. So yeah, they were really big dogs back then. So I surmise that it may have been some form of bulldog.
You really think so?
Yeah, I actually do. Yeah.
Okay. I'm going to pause this for a second, Doug, because I just got a battery warning. So hang on 1 second.
Okay.
Well, that's kind of an interesting philosophy. I'm curious because they really don't talk about what the fur looks like. They just say that it's black fur.
Right.
And there
is the one report where they say it's shaggy.
Oh, that's true. That's right. Yeah. That's right. It did say that. But there's other things about it that's kind of fascinating that I don't believe were discussed in the Hounds of the Baskerville story at all, if I remember right.
Right. I mean, in the book, they're really, they hear dogs and and everybody's afraid that it's these hellhounds,
Right.
But it's all a ruse to cover up, the murder mystery. So you never see dogs. There's never there's never any paranormal confrontation or anything like that. Like I said, it's a sleuth.
Right.
So, but that is where the inspiration for using the hounds like that came from the old Shuck legend.
Well, what's interesting is in England, this is a very well-known story. This is one of those things like the boogeyman in some areas. Mm-hmm. So I wanted to just go over the history part a little bit because it's interesting. So in 1577, literally they have the date, August 4th of 1577, in the Holy Trinity Church in England, this dog, Black Shuck, burst into the church and attacked a man and a boy, killing them. And there are still, and then exited abruptly afterwards. And people swear that it left burn marks on the doors. And that's where the identification of it as a hellhound, because supposedly it was burning. The dog was on fire. And then not long after that, in another, I need to back up. In this particular church, 2 people died, a man and a boy, and the burn marks, and the steeple in the church collapsed, which was a huge deal.
Right.
Not long after that, in the same year, it happened again in another church called St. Mary's. Same. And I mean everything the same. A man and a boy were murdered in the church by this big black dog. The steeple fell in St. Mary's also, and there were burn marks by the door, which, what are the odds of that? That's insane. And then in 1877, jumping ahead in the past, there was a huge sighting, and this was from Petersburg to Stanford area of England. I'm not familiar with that personally, but I glanced over at a map. It's a pretty big area. And so this was a sighting in 1877 that many people viewed from different little areas, little villages. And they said, these people all testified that there were large men, all in black, on black horses with black dogs, furry with red eyes. And they appeared to be in numbers of 20 to 30. So 20 to 30 men and horses with a bunch of dogs. And it appeared that they were on a hunt. They didn't come after anyone. They didn't come into town. So no one actually had any accounts of interacting with this group, but they said it looked like they were on a hunt. And they were, for several months, apparently, they traveled back and forth between these areas in England, which is incredible. Well, there was also a belief that it was a sign of impending doom. The villagers freaked out because this was very daunting.
Right.
A bunch of people all dressed in black dogs, glowing red eyes. There's already been 300 years of the story of the Black Shuck, and then here's a whole bunch of them with a whole bunch of big black horses and these guys all in black. I can just imagine. Can you imagine how scary that would be? Good Lord.
Right. Well, I mean, it's not exclusive to that region of the UK either. Hellhounds have a role in American blues mythology.
Oh, really? What's that?
So, the famous blues guitar player Robert Johnson, was said to have sold his soul at the crossroads.
Oh, that's right.
In order to be this great guitar player.
Right.
And in his songs, he talks about, there are some passages that talk about hellhounds being on his heels.
I don't remember that.
Yeah. So, so they're basically saying that, he made a deal with the devil. And then when the contract was up, then that's when the hellhounds come out to drag you down to hell.
Oh, wow. Okay.
That's and cool. So some reports or some mythology says that you see it as a black dog, like Black Shuck. Mm-hmm. Other people say that that it's like they're invisible to everybody else, but except the person that they're hunting.
I have heard that.
Yeah.
I have heard that. I also wanted to mention that going backwards a little bit between the first story and the last story I just shared. In 1850, there was a gentleman by the name of E.S. Taylor in a book called Notes and Theory that also talked about Black Shuck, and that he would hang around churchyards, that he was seen in cemeteries and churchyards, that was a common place for him to be. It was not, Black Shuck was not a creature that people saw in their houses or directly at someone's residence or specific, except for one exception. So there was a story that came later, and this is really fascinating. So what's amazing is that Black Shuck was also looked upon as a hero, and the reason why is because this is amazing. So supposedly Black Shuck would follow this girl that kept getting attacked by a perverted priest. And so every time she would go for a walk or go somewhere where she might possibly encounter the priest, this dog would appear. And just as equally as simply as he would appear to her, as soon as the danger was gone, the dog would disappear. So we're talking not just at night, during the day. And then what's fascinating is in the 1930s, you're going to love this, guys. This one gives me the goosebumps. Okay, so there was a midwife, and if anyone's watched, Call the Midwife, this was fascinating. So this midwife was traveling by herself on a bicycle, and it was dark and scary where she was, and this dog appeared, and it never growled at her, it never barked at her, but it stayed right next to her for the longest time and followed her from one location to another. And she swears that it disappeared like smoke. And so she didn't know why it was there. And she said her initial reaction was fear because of the red eyes. But she said she realized quickly this thing could just bite me at any time and lunge at me, and it hasn't. So why is it still there? And so part of her just kind of calmed down. And then she documented it afterwards because she was between deliveries, and she thought, this dog followed me. Why? Why did this dog follow me? And so it was chalked up to the Black Shuck legend again. But what's interesting about it is everybody says a few things: dark hair, red eyes, and that it appears mysteriously and leaves mysteriously. And it's not known for being aggressive, except for the 2 acts of violence back in the 1500s, which is fascinating to me. So again, where the story originated and what ended up developing were very, very different.
Well, it's interesting that, it starts out seemingly as a sinister type of thing.
Yes.
But then you have these reports where it appears that there is some form of guardianship over sacred ground.
Sacred ground and people that need protection.
Right, exactly. So it's become a guardian figure.
Right.
At the same time. That's very interesting because you don't normally see that kind of thing of something with red glowing burning eyes.
Right.
That usually is an indication that they're trying to tell you, oh, this thing's malevolent.
Well, and we also know just from the development of photograph and camera technology over the last 100 years that certain creatures have yellow or red film in their eyes, and people do, even in the right color spectrum of a photograph.
Right. And when a photograph, when a flash hits it, or
right. So we're not so terrified of red eyes anymore because we see that, oh yeah, cat's eyes look like that. And
they call that they call that eye shine.
Right. And so it's not so terrifying to us. But can you imagine when, several hundred years ago, 1,000 years ago, 2,000 years ago, whatever, anything in nature like that, if it's unfamiliar, it's automatically bad. It's automatically scary because it doesn't look like a person, so it must be bad. It must be scary.
Right.
I just think it's amazing. I think it's completely amazing. So I wanted to segue. I know this may seem like a weird segue, but because of the Hounds of the Baskerville, there's all this story identification with the scary dog. And that's had many evolutions into other dog stories that were equally terrifying.
Like Stephen King's Cujo and
Right. Many evolutions since then.
Right.
But it's interesting that the actual written history has a very different evolution. My words are not coming to me easily tonight. Sorry, guys. But in likewise form, I also wanted to talk about something that started one way that's becoming another way, and that's seances. So seances have been around since Roman and Greek times. There has always been a time for people to commune with the dead. Sometimes it's at a funeral procession, and Doug can share with you this, when going to New Orleans, there's a definite procedure for walking the dead to the grave. There's a lot of respect and honor that's involved with that. And it's quite beautiful. And most of it is an understanding that you're going to separate from a loved one in many ways, not just physically, but spiritually as well. And so after the Civil War, we had one of the biggest times of loss in the count of people that passed on in the history of our world. This was one of the largest losses that we, especially as a country in particular, this was a huge loss. There was a ton of people that passed away. And so the interest and the demand for talking with the beyond went way up. And so there was a lot of evolutions that transpired from that. And that's where we ended up getting a Ouija board as a game later on. It became less interesting and less available, and people started to play with it. And there were lots of ways. My point is, there's lots of ways that being involved with a seance is something that we've either been curious about, that we've played with, or we've heard of. So the reason for the seance was always the same: to talk with a loved one that had died. But in recent years, seances for me with Doug have evolved into something entirely different, a little unique. I don't sit down with people for them to talk to their loved ones as much anymore. I have in the past for quite a bit of my life. But what's interesting is I now have a regular time that I have ghosts come to me to talk to me about what they need. So it's like a seance for ghosts, not a seance to talk to a ghost per se with a living person, but an actual seance for ghosts to talk to me, a spirit medium, to help them share their story or go into whatever section of life that they want to delve into, whether it's their memory of their death, their conversations with a loved one, what they would like to know about the current life that they're in, why they didn't move on, or maybe they do want to move on, and how do they do it now?
Right. Or even discussing, their fears about moving on. Mm-hmm. It's very interesting that the living adjacent seem to have the same kind of issues that we all have. We all have worries and fears and anxieties,
right,
of the unknown.
Right. So I want to speak to that as a psychic medium, and I want to just say this with all respect for all religions and all faiths. I believe that when we are on the earth, whether you believe it's your first time or your 100th time, we have to have a disconnect from our heaven that we came from, or however you believe that is. Because if we're connected too much to that, we don't experience life as a person as we should. If we come into this world with all the universal consciousness connected and wide open in our brains, we're not going to experience life as a human, because we're going to be too evolved and too aware of everything around us. When we're born as a human being, we only know our immediate feelings. We know that we're cold, or that we have to go to the bathroom, or that we're hungry, or we need a hug. And those immediate ego things are the only things we're really aware of. And it takes years to learn the rest of what's going on around us.
Right.
In the afterlife, there is this incredible can opener experience where without pain, you suddenly are in this all-knowing. in my near-death experience, I can explain this in the simplest of ways, in that I did not recall ever feeling like this before, but it makes sense to me that we come from this. You know everything around you, you know every soul around you, and you know everything about them as you're near them. And there's all this love. There's no confusion. There's no envy. There's no jealousy. There's no resentment. There's no burden. There's no hate. There's no pain. There's no distress. None. It's all loving. And there's this understanding and this incredible, incredible peace. It's absolutely indescribable, in that I've never felt that calm before in my life. I didn't want to leave. I felt like that was the best feeling I'd ever had. So I can understand, it makes sense to me that if I felt that good, connecting to should I get my toenails pink or red makes no sense. There's no connection to the physical world, because it's too amazing. There'd be no way to focus on driving or raising a child or having a job or getting up in the morning. None of that would make any sense if you were connected to this all-knowing all the time. It wouldn't make sense. So likewise, as a human being, I say this only because I want you to understand that as a person, when you die, if you don't go right back into that all-knowing, you're still a person, but without a body. So you really don't know. You don't remember where you came from. You don't remember the heaven that you were formed in, or the all-knowing that you were formed in. You don't remember the peace and calm that you have waiting for you, and all the answers that are unanswered so far. All those things that you don't understand are all ready and waiting for you to be explained. But the idea of crossing over is terrifying because you don't remember what's there. So a lot of what I get, as you can imagine, when a person that's in the veil, as we call it, so someone who has died, they don't have their body, they still have their personality, they still have their soul, or whatever you want to call it, their spirit, and they know they can come find somebody like me, because there's lots of people that do what I do, and they come and visit, and they say, I don't know if I want to leave. I just lost all my stress. I don't have a body to worry about anymore, and I can still see my family that's alive. I kind of want to stay here. I'm a little nervous about what's beyond this. I just kind of figured out my life. I don't want to go yet. The cool part is you don't have to go until you're ready. So that's kind of amazing. That's one of the things I've learned over many years. And secondly, if you are ready, there's ways to go into the beyond, the rest of the beyond, that is the all-knowing, or heaven, if you prefer to call it that. I find it amazing that so many of us get lost and stuck on words and get so nervous. If you don't use the right phrase or the right terminology, then you're not correct, or you're not okay. Please have grace with me, and please understand that I'm sharing things to the best of my ability to help people understand things that are normal for me and common, and things that people don't experience all the time. Most people I meet have either heard of or had an experience with someone that died.
Yes.
And maybe Doug can share some of this, because I told him, people are going to say things to me that you're not used to hearing. Can you imagine dating someone as a psychic and a medium and saying, just be prepared. People are going to say things and blurt things to me that you are not used to hearing. And he was, of course, a gracious person and said, okay, yeah, sure. And so maybe you can share something about that, Doug, or talk about the seances a little bit so that people understand what I'm trying to explain.
Well, the seances, I mean, they are way different than the traditional definition of what a seance is. Holly being a light worker or a ghost worker, it's really all about addressing the spirit, the ghost that's coming through, and trying to help them with whatever they need, whether they just want to tell their story, whether they want to relate how they passed, whether they want to talk about Their family members, maybe they don't know how they passed and they want to know. And we are kind of tasked a little bit with helping them figure that out. And, or they come to give us information about our own lives. It's a wide array of things, but it's all based off of the spirits, not people wanting to talk to the spirits.
So I thought what I would do, since I haven't done much of this, I keep notes of all my seances, and I wanted to share our last one a little bit, some of the notes that I've taken, because Doug will remind me sometimes, as I am in another altered state of mind, I don't remember all the details on my own. A good friend of ours that's a psychic had shared this as well, William Becker. And honestly, if someone gives me a trigger word or something, it might help me go back to that moment in time when I was in a trance, kind of. I don't close my eyes or say weird things, or my voice doesn't change. It's nothing like that.
You say weird things, but
yeah,
but you don't have to be in a seance to do that.
Yes, it's my natural ADHD state. But my point is, things happen and I don't always remember because it's not coming from me. It's coming from somewhere else. So that's why I take notes. And if I go back and review them, then I go like, oh yeah, that's right. I remember that time or that thing. So the first ghost last week that we visited with didn't want to sit down. And when I say that, I mean, we literally sit at a table like you would imagine in the way they show a seance in a movie. People sit around a table, and ours is a little different. We set it up with...
We sit at our dining room table, and we pull a chair out for them, and we pour them a cup of coffee, mm-hmm. just like they're a neighbor stopping by, mm-hmm. To chew the fat.
And I'm just going to say, as a preface, as a public service message really quick, if you ever want to try this, please don't just do it by the seat of your butt. Don't just sit down and do that. Please protect your space before you start. Please use incense or sage or something like that and clear your entire space's energy before you ever start.
Yeah, you have to set the boundaries real quick.
You must set boundaries before you begin any of this. Second, when you're done, close it off. Just like you would on a Ouija board. You must respect what it is you're doing. This is not the same as going to the post office and dropping off a letter with information. You're talking to the afterworld, and it's not the same as our world. It is not the same. You must respect it. You must treat it like the ocean. It's much bigger and much more powerful than the space you live in. You must set boundaries, and you must be very clear with your intentions. Going back to the story. So this first ghost that showed up didn't want to sit. They smelled the coffee, and the woman said her name was Marion, but she spelled it differently, Maryun, different type of spelling. She said she had 3 kids. She had long hair. She was from the West Coast. She went to college in the foothills. She said my heartbeat was distracting her because it's off. I had a heart attack, so my heart does beat a little weird. She said that she worked on feet in the medical community. She said her anniversary was November 5th. She was frustrated. She hated politics. She had a wedding. Oh, that's right. She had her wedding on election day to take away the sting of votes because she was so annoyed by politics. She purposefully got married on November 5th so that every year she would have something to celebrate and not talk about politics. Politics bothered her so much. So I thought that was really clever that she did that. And then after that, another man showed up and said he was Chinese. He said his name was San Yun, Y-U-E-N. He spelled it for me. He said his nickname was Uncle Tom, and he preferred to be called Tom because he was a big fan of Tom Brady. So he's a more recently dead person. He said that his daughter feels him, and he's wishing she will contact him. And he said his biggest regret was that he did not teach her to think like a man, and that her name was Amy. He explained to me that he was very traditional in what he did with his daughter, except he wanted her to understand how to think strategically, and that he was worried about her because he didn't feel like she was planning ahead enough. And he explained to me his philosophy about saving money. And he explained to me how when people deal with each other, especially in business, you have to really strategize like a chess game always. And he said that she is too open and kind, and then he worried about some of her choices that she was making. But that sounded like pretty normal dad stuff to me.
Right.
Okay, next one was Kevin Allen Davis. And he looked really weak to me. And he said he was from the 1700s. And so I questioned the three names, because most people from that time area do not have three names. They have one, and on rare occasions they'll have a second, and that would have been from a landlord, typically. So that was odd. So that didn't make sense to me. But this person definitely was very fragmented in their energy. So I told them when they got more restored in their energy, they could come back and we would try and talk again.
Yeah, he is having a real hard time communicating.
Yes.
So yeah, he needed to recharge his batteries, and so we're hoping that he comes back, when he is more capable of open communication.
And then the next one was very animated. The ghost was very funny. And so I have to describe this like you're watching a movie. So if you've ever watched a movie where there's a big windstorm or a cartoon and someone hangs onto a pole and the wind's blowing their legs behind them, and they're kind of that's what this ghost did. They were super funny. And so most ghosts are very cordial and they sit down and they're very polite. This one was just a hoot. It grabbed the back of the chair and it had its legs floating behind him and flapping like it was blowing in the wind. It was hysterical. And so if you can think in terms of the Norse gods, kind of like a Loki energy, very, very mischievous, very whimsical, very playful. And they actually came just to give me a message. So that was kind of cool. And
he was very much a trickster vibe.
Right. But not with ill intent, just mischievous. Anyway, I'm going to move on. And then I had another ghost show up. And this one, if you saw the Harry Potter movies, I want to give you a picture to think of. This ghost presented like Hagrid. Very large.
It was that big. Yeah.
It took up the whole hallway, and barely was like ducking down the hallway with the head, and the shoulders went all the way across. And so I asked them to resize themselves so they could sit at the chair and be more comfortable to talk to us. And they did. And the ghost actually had what looked kind of like a ghillie suit, like what a sniper would wear. It was very interesting.
And that's not the first time you've been presented with that image.
Right. Okay. And then that was an interesting conversation, but I got to move on. Let's see. And then the next one told me that I needed to fix the screen in the sunroom because it was bothering them, which I thought was hysterical. You know how there's always a spot in your house that you forget, that you kind of neglect, like you should do this thing and that there and whatever. So there's this one screen in our house where the previous resident had a cat area, and I love cats, but I am allergic to them, sadly. But this one window was clearly the cat's patio area, and there's all these snaggy tear marks in this one screen. So I took it down and I shut the window, haven't opened it since. And so this ghost actually said, you need to fix that screen. You need that window to open. And I thought, okay. So that's funny that sometimes they just give me messages. Sometimes they just come through and say something simple like that, nothing extraordinary. They're not telling me about ends of days or anything crazy. They just talk to me like a person. It's wonderful.
But there are instances where they tell you that there's going to be some natural disaster or something. I mean, it's pretty rare, but there are those instances.
Yes. And then sometimes we get visitors that were very unexpected. And so there's things that happen that I'm very unfamiliar with. And one of them was a visit a while back. This wasn't this last week, but long before that. And Doug reminded me. There is a guide that a lot of people have, and her name is Hecate. And I didn't know much about her. And, I was raised,
yes.
so I was raised in a Roman Catholic type of situation and Presbyterian. So I've heard about saints and I've heard about this, that, and the other, and that type of faith stuff. So I'm still learning a lot about other religions and other ideas and other guides. And so one of the things that fascinated me that I've learned about Hecate is that she was actually considered a triple deity. So she actually came from the time of the Titans, and she was a daughter of an original Titan, which was
she is from the Greek mythology.
Yes, thank you. Yes. And that she was actually considered a neutral entity. And what's interesting too is that something that was shared in my studying her was that there's things that connect people to her. And I thought this was an interesting list. So I'm not sure how accurate this is, but maybe someone that has more knowledge on Hecate can confirm or correct me on this.
Please comment below.
Yes. So one of the things that are supposedly a sign that you're connected with Hecate is that you're drawn to study her. That's kind of obvious. Some of her symbols are seen, and she has a really interesting symbol that's a circle that looks like a puzzle map. You know how when you're a kid and you go in the Sunday paper and you draw around these lines to try and find your way through a maze? Her symbol looks a bit like that.
Yeah. The circular maze thing is surprisingly very universal. It's in a lot of different cultures. It's in Native American cultures. Mm-hmm. It's in Greek cultures. I mean, it's very common.
Right. But another thing that's interesting about her symbols and things that are connected with her: dogs. She's very connected with dogs, apparently. Keys. Mm-hmm. If you keep seeing keys, some kind of keys are connected to her. Yeah. Owls, because she's very much a goddess of knowledge and nocturnal things. Serpents and dragons, horses, ravens, and blackbirds. And so these are all symbols of her. So supposedly, and repeating numbers, which I thought was really fascinating, because most of the time when I Google things to do with numerology or things to do with repeating numbers, there's a specific catchphrase, that 1111 means this or 222 means that. But this actually just kind of gave a blank statement that repeating numbers are a connection to Hecate. And I thought, oh, all right. So next time
but specifically it was the number 3.
Yeah, and that was connected to it, but also just repeating numbers, which I thought was interesting. So 333 or 33, that's a connection that she's trying to connect with you, supposedly. So that's interesting. That's something I didn't know that. And that she tends to come through dreams, and she's drawn into magic and divination. Yeah. And torches. So light or things to do with torchlight and that sort of thing is to do with her as well, which is kind of amazing. So if you've never looked at Hecate or you don't know what she's about, I encourage you to check her out. She's fascinating. She's had a bad rap like many different goddesses have. It seems that goddesses have had an evolution, because some goddesses were considered strong and powerful and amazing, like Athena, and, goddess of war and all this amazing stuff that she was capable of. And then other goddesses were, considered villains in the story of life and such. So is history boring? No, not for me. There's so much to it that's fascinating. And when you're talking about spirituality, not religion, but spirituality, I think that there's a lot more than what we see with our eyes. I think there's a lot more that we sense and feel that we should pay more attention to, definitely. For sure. Yep. So is there anything else about the seances you think would be good to share, Doug?
What's interesting is in doing these, and we've been doing these for years now, when it comes to the gods and goddesses, there really is no one religion.
Oh, that's a good point.
They all exist. Holly has a connection with Anubis, but she also has a connection with Jesus Christ.
Yes.
Yeah, they, like I said, they all exist, um, and there does appear to be some form of hierarchy. What that
Yes.
is, I couldn't tell you, but the religion doesn't really seem to be a factor.
Yeah. So for people that are on the fence that are thinking about, well, if I'm a Christian, I can't talk to Hecate, or if I talk to Hecate, I can't talk to a saint, or I can't talk to a spirit that's considered an archangel or something. I got great news for everybody. From the other side, religion is not what we've been taught here on the earth. It
They're
just
all playing on the same team.
isn't. Just isn't. And so
Yeah.
my experience with Jesus was as intimate and as personal as it could be with the God as you can possibly imagine. I had Jesus come and see me when I lost 3 immediate members of my family. And then I had a couple other people that I loved dearly that were like family. And so I'd lost 5 people in my family in a period of 2 years, and it wiped me out. I could not function. I could not think. I couldn't eat. I couldn't sleep. I, of course, was crying all the time. And I just was in this really dark place. I could not function. And I'm saying this because I know that some of us are feeling that way right now. There's times in our lives that we just get so outside of our comfort zones, and so life is thrust upon us in such a hard and violent way that we don't see a way out. We don't see a way around where we're at in that moment. We're so overwhelmed and we're so upset, hurt, scared, intimidated, exhausted, emotional, whatever the words are that apply to you right now. And I just want to say, you are loved, and there's always help for you. Always, always, always. Jesus just showed up in my very humble apartment living room, and he sat right by me, and he just waited. And I was so in awe. I felt better the minute he was in the room. I felt like it was daylight right next to me. It's like somebody took the roof off and there was daylight in my apartment. And I just felt lifted, like I was being healed emotionally and mentally all at once. And I had that feeling of heaven again, like when I had my near death experience. And so I knew who it was immediately. I could see him. I saw his face. I saw him. And he just stayed with me for a moment. But that moment connected me with him again, like when I had my near death experience with him. And I felt better. I felt better.
Well,
And
and he also seems to, with you, he definitely has a sense of humor. Like we've been, and not to throw any churches under the bus or anything like
right.
that, but we've been in church services, and he's whispered in Holly's ear, "I never said that," which is hilarious, But yeah.
So if I could say something about Jesus, I would say he has so much personality, and he is so full of love, and he has such a compassion for our lives that is incredible. And my experiences with different entities, and I mean like the Archangel Michael, um, several other archangels that I've talked with and experienced, there's so much love and there's so much compassion, and they're right there. They're not out of a book. You do not have to go to a church and get on your knees and sacrifice your life and donate your pocketbook to reach them. They're right with you right now.
Every step of the way.
They're right here. And so you just need to ask, and they will come. They're very loving and they're very caring. And it's right there. It's not religion, it's spirituality. There's a big difference.
Right.
And is what you believe is what you'll notice and find. So if you give yourself the chance Think about the afterlife as something that you're going to do when you're done with this living here, and that it's around you all the time. And so I say that only to not to freak you out, but just to say you're not alone.
Right.
You're not alone. Whatever it is you're going through, whatever it is you're feeling, lots of people have been through crap before you, and they made it, and you will make it. You will be okay.
Right.
You're going to be okay. And your ancestors are a part of your bloodstream as much as they're a part of your airspace. They're still here. They're still around. And I'm not talking about ones that might have hurt you in the past. I'm talking about the ones that you know loved you and cared about you, even if you don't remember them. They know you, and they're right there. They're right there to help. And there's lots more out there. There's lots more to experience. I just wanted to cheer everybody up a little bit. I hope this did. I really hope that everyone found this to be helpful and interesting. I would very much like to hear about some other stories that people would like. I have some wonderful guests coming up soon. If you have a chance to come out to Hillsboro on December 7th on Saturday, Doug and I are going to be at the Pagan Fire sponsored Winter Moon Bazaar, and that's in Hillsboro at the Wingspan Event Center. I remembered. I have a hard time remembering names of things sometimes. It's a wonderful place, and we're going to be there again in February, on February 8th. And we'll be there again in May, and then October and December. 4 times a year, 1, 2, 3, 4, we go out to this event center, and we do things with Pagan Fire. And their events are all moon-based. They're all moon cycles.
Yeah, they're all based off of the solstices and the equinoxes.
Yeah.
All the pagan holidays.
Right. And it's a one-day event usually. In October, we just had a 2-day event. But they're a wonderful way to just visit with people. If you've been curious about the pagan community and you really don't know what it is, the word pagan just means anybody who's not going to church for Christ in particular. It doesn't mean that they're by God.
It's any spiritualism that isn't the 4 major religions, basically.
Right. It's not Satanism. There are Satanist churches, I understand. I've never been in one, but pagans are literally not what you might think. And so you might want to check it out and see for yourself.
Yeah, but as our friend Chris says, the Satanists they're just Catholics. They're just Christians. They're Satan is theirs. So it's funny.
We have to find reasons to giggle and laugh, you guys. Our world is very serious at times and overwhelming. This is Holly from Holly's Pandorium saying thank you for listening and watching. And I'd love to hear your comments. And I will be back again soon with more cool stuff to talk about. Have a wonderful evening. Be good to yourself. Be good to your loved ones. And I hope you have a wonderful night. And thank you, Doug, for helping me with this tonight.
Oh, you're welcome. Oh, and by the way, whoever's doing your vocal intro in the beginning is fantastic.
It's him. Oh, I got to point the other way. It's him. Thank you very much. Have a good night or good afternoon. Bye, guys.
Take care.
Thank you for listening to Holly's Pandorium. If you have stories to share, you can find me on hollyspandorium.com, Facebook, Instagram, and YouTube. You can also listen on Spotify and our wonderful Metal Cross Radio at radioking.com. Thanks again for listening.